Hey guys, today we're going to be answering tapering questions that have come in on the speak pipe. Thank you so much for sending them in, and we're going to get right into it.
My question is, why can't someone remain on a low dose of benzos for sleep if their brain works well with it? It's the only thing that helps me sleep. None of the psychotropics work. I've weaned myself off.
There's no reason why you can't remain on a benzo if it's working for you. I mean, coming off them can be really difficult. This is obviously not for everyone. The main place where I tell people to just stay on these medications is if they're older and if they've been on these medications for decades. If they're still working for them, you don't need to mess with it. However, if you're earlier on in life or you haven't been on it that long, there's a lot of opportunity for these drugs to eventually turn on you, because what we know about these medications is that in a large group of people, eventually they stop being effective, and sometimes they even make people more anxious. And so if you're younger and if you hadn't been on the medication too long, my recommendation is to come off gradually. If you're older and you've been on it for decades, you might just leave it alone.
Is Vistaril a drug that has to be tapered, hydroxyine, or can I stop it cold turkey?
Yeah, so I don't actually hear about anyone developing protracted withdrawal injury from coming off anticholinergics like Benadryl and Vistaril. So in general, I don't really recommend stopping anything cold turkey if you can avoid it, but I think you would be okay with a rapid to fast taper. So you might come off it in 2 to 4 weeks, no problem. So I think you can taper it pretty quickly.
Hi, Dr. Joseph. I love your shows and thank you. It's really wonderful. I just wanted to ask, what is your take on Vyvanse? I'm taking every day 54 milligrams for adult ADHD. It helps a lot.
Yeah, so stimulants for adult ADHD. The first thing I want to say is that stimulants tend to be the safest of the psychiatric medications from my experience. I have never seen anyone have severe withdrawal problems from them. Yes, I see people get depressed and anhedonic, but they do not appear to cause anywhere near the amount of devastation that the antidepressants and the benzodiazepines cause. Without getting too deep into it, I mean, my overall philosophy is, you want to look for the root cause. If there is something causing the ADHD, you want to address that. However, if that's just the way it is and that medication is working fine for you, stimulants tend to be generally, all things considered equal, safer than most of the other psychiatric meds.
Hi, Doctor. I have a question about the relationship between benzodiazepines and the hormone progesterone or progestin. I have been successfully tapering until coming off birth control and was thrown into full-blown akathisia and benzo withdrawal that has nearly killed me. I had to go back on birth control, but no one believes it was due to some sort of cross-tolerance.
Yeah, so progesterone is active at the GABA receptors as well, and it has a GABA effect. And so I know that from a theoretical perspective, that when you would remove that birth control, you may be kind of modifying those GABA receptors in a way where if you already have protracted withdrawal or you're tapering, that might be almost like taking a large drop down in that kind of receptor binding from the drug. So it doesn't surprise me that coming off that triggered a flare up in your symptoms. Other things that I notice in the women who are coming, this is women of childbearing potential, premenopausal women who are coming off their medications, is they always seem to feel worse during their period. So there's definitely something hormonal going on with drug tapering, especially with the benzodiazepines. How might you avoid this? Well, you may decide that you don't change your hormonal contraceptives while you're tapering. You might leave them exactly the way that they are. You taper your benzodiazepine, and then you give it about a year after you come off to further recover, and then you would come off the hormonal contraceptive at that time. I actually don't know whether you can kind of micro-taper these things or do cut and holds, but if you looked into that, you might actually be able to take a gradual step down in your hormonal contraceptive if you're taking a tablet form of that. Another thing you might do is, if you have an implant or something like that, where it just wears off after 5 years, you might have it just sort of self-taper. You might just leave it in there longer, and then eventually it will self-taper, and then you could remove it later on. Hey, so if you're wondering on how to send me these questions, go to the description next to the video. There's going to be a link to my beacons there. If you click on that, you can click on the link to send me a voicemail.
Hi, Dr. Josef. Recently, I took 2 25-milligram Sertraline as I suffer from OCD, and I really suffered. I only took 2, immediately stopped after that because I noticed I had complete emotional blunting, suicidal ideation, sexual dysfunction and blunting. Thankfully, that left after a week. However, now I've taken 2 B12 1,000 microgram supplements, and I've noticed a slight emotional numbness come back and some erectile dysfunction. I've seen some things like that online, so I was just wondering what you thought of this.
I'm always learning from people, and you may have found that there's a relationship between that vitamin and the serotonin system in some way. So potentially there is, especially if you've heard other stories that are similar to yours. But however, what I will say is, after you have an adverse reaction to a drug, sometimes it peters out slowly. So if you just took it for a couple of days and you had these symptoms, then it went away, and then a week later the symptoms came back up, that may still have been originally from the adverse drug reaction, and it's just kind of just flaring up a little bit as it goes away. But because it didn't disappear in a very clear and linear way, maybe you think it's due to the vitamins. And so I'm not sure. Maybe it is due to the vitamins, but I've definitely seen adverse reactions kind of linger on for, several weeks after someone's come off the drug.
Hey, Dr. Josef, I'm curious if you ever hear any stories or have any information about protracted withdrawal or similar problems with longer-term opiate use, painkillers. I'm curious if that seems to be an issue, because I know often, the standard tapering there is kind of 1 or 2 weeks of withdrawals, and then it's expected to be finished. And I think people tend to extrapolate that tapering schedule into other drugs, and it makes me question if it's even true for the opiates in the first place.
In general, opiates tend to be easier to come off. I say easier to come off than the antidepressants and the benzos, but that's because the antidepressants and the benzos actually cause neurological damage, clear neurological damage, when people come off sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes they do. I'm not seeing that with the opiates. People, doing rapid withdrawals from heroin or fentanyl, ending up with neurological injury. Sometimes they have these, these ongoing withdrawal symptoms. So typically what you see with opiates and even things like methamphetamine is a week of really severe symptoms, and then the week after that is still pretty bad, but it's getting better. And then you'll have residual symptoms up to two to 3 months later, where you'll continue to recover at that time, and usually then it's over. And so that would be my expectation for coming off opiates.
Hey, Dr. Josef, I'm wondering if you could maybe discuss a little bit about some of the risks of stimulant-based ADHD medication. I don't think I've ever really heard about protracted withdrawals or similar issues with those medications. I know some of the non-stimulants for ADHD have overlaps with some other medications, like Wellbutrin is used for ADHD and depression. But I haven't heard much about the stimulants with those kind of problems. And I was wondering if you could maybe make a video or talk a little bit about that.
To my knowledge, protracted withdrawal injury does not happen with stimulants like Ritalin or Adderall or Vyvanse. And really, I don't see it with Wellbutrin either. Protracted withdrawal injury seems to be confined to the serotonergic antidepressants and the benzodiazepines, and also things like Ambien. I don't see it in stimulants. Also, people tend to be able to come off stimulants fairly easily. And so I guess what you're noticing is also what I'm noticing. I will call out one drug here which I would be curious about, and that would be atomoxetine, which is a noradrenaline reuptake inhibitor that's frequently used for ADHD in children and adults in the US. Because that's kind of a different mechanism, it's one of these reuptake inhibitors. It's closer to the antidepressant class. Potentially you could have maybe some protracted withdrawal issues with Strattera, or also known as atomoxetine.